Good afternoon and welcome to After Hours. Joining me this afternoon is Deb Goldman, who is the president of the Mayne Island Housing Society. Welcome to the show and welcome to the Mayne Inn Resort.
Good. Thank you very much, Patrice. It's good to be here.
So I wanted to start talking to you about how you got here. You started off as a social worker. Can you talk about doing that work in Vancouver?
Sure. I was a social worker working with vulnerable children and families in child welfare. And most of my career has been with government and working with vulnerable families in child welfare. While I was doing that, there are some key things that if you're working with people and they need to improve somehow, they're dealing with issues, that key issues for me were always childcare and housing. And if people had secure housing and secure childcare if they needed it, then they were able to then make the changes that they needed to make in their lives. And it was not easy to find secure housing in Vancouver.
Did you work for organizations and how did that work? And how did you help people find housing? Because there's been a great deal, especially in the downtown east side in Vancouver, a great deal of effort put into good housing.
And when I moved here, it was the late 80s in
Right.
Vancouver, and there was a big housing shift where people were not building rental houses anymore and people were building condos for sale. And I worked for government, BC government, the Ministry of Children and Family Development. And people were able to go on housing registries with BC Housing or with Vancouver Housing. There were registries there too. People found houses in homes. I didn't help them find housing. We would refer them to places.
Okay.
But one of the things that I was able to do as a social worker was that if the family was having difficulty and the children needed protection, were removed from the home, the family needed to maintain suitable family housing in order to have the children come back to them.
Right.
And so I would be talking with their income assistance worker to ensure that they didn't have any change to their income so they could maintain their housing, their shelter portion as they needed it. So that was one of the ways that I was involved with housing for these people.
And so what about women who get support? In an earlier conversation, you were mentioning working with women and how that changed their lives if they had security, for one thing.
I think what we know, working with people, vulnerable populations, that in order for people to make the changes, for instance, if they're drug affected or if they're involved with alcohol and they need to do treatment or change their lifestyle in some way, that they are able to do that more effectively when they have stable housing. And that not having stable housing is an impediment to their progress through their changes, what they need to do. And women who were, there was always housing needs, whether women were leaving violent relationships and they went into second stage housing, there were housing available for them in the downtown east side for that. Yeah.
So did you have to seek out housing to help people or not so much?
I was in touch with some of the housing providers.
Okay.
Yeah, and we would refer people to different places. Of course, I would be visiting people in their homes.
So what places did you visit in the downtown east side or have association with in some form?
Oh my goodness. Well, a lot of our clients were with Shiway, and I used to work with Shiway, both as a social worker and then we had contact through the contract work that I was doing.
What kind of contract work?
I was a contract procurement specialist. I moved from being a social worker.
What does that mean?
Okay, I'll tell you. I moved from being a social worker for about 15 years with the provincial government, a social worker and a team leader, and then I moved into finance and I did contract management. So what procurement means is I dealt with contracts where we contracted with social service agencies to provide services to the same populations that we were responsible for. So,
give me an example.
Okay, well, Vancouver Native Health Society had a family support program that I would work with them around the programs that they were providing, the contract dollars. We would negotiate contracts. We put out procurement opportunities, commonly known as RFPs, something like that, or if there were grant opportunities, people would put in applications for grants. I spent 15 years of my life doing that in Vancouver with all sorts of different program areas, but always with the Ministry of Children and Family Development. And then I moved to Victoria, and my portfolio expanded, and I worked with First Nations communities all across the province, as well as other provincial contracts that were held in Victoria.
So, and you're here now.
And I'm here now.
And how did the Mayne Island Housing Society get started? I know there were surveys done about the need for housing on the island. So how did the society come to be?
Before I started being involved with the housing, it was the Mayne Island Housing Forum. And it was a group of interested people who got together periodically to talk about housing needs on the island and some ideas for solutions and what kinds of methods and models would be useful and what do people want to see. And they were exploring the idea, they were exploring the need. There was a need totally expressed for workforce housing, for seasonal housing, for family housing, verbally. But there have also been many surveys done, both on a regional level, an Islands Trust level, back 25 years, regional level, and we did one here. So going back to the Mayne Island Housing Forum, they started meeting at about in 2016, and I joined in 2018. And so we incorporated as the Mayne Island Housing Society in April 2018, and in September of 2019, we became a charity. And that's a very no small feat to become a charity.
Yes, that is a hard thing to do, actually.
So that was a very good thing. And we have moved quickly through whatever activities we've been doing. So we have been a society for, well, if it's spring 2018, so that's 3 years. Yeah.
Who's on the boards? Who's on the board? What kinds of people with, I'm assuming they have various skills. Yes.
We have a fabulous board right now. We are 7 people. We have people who come to us from varied backgrounds. We have people who come with experience as business owners in banking, government finance and procurement, and that was me. We have people with senior executive in private business as well as in government, CEO, director, general, associate, deputy minister levels. So we have people with a high skill level in strategic planning, in the things that you need to have for this, which would be risk assessments and developing plans and carrying out plans. We've got elected officials on our board. We've got project management and construction.
What about people who need housing? Have they been involved and how?
That's a really good point. And we have opened it up for people who need housing to come. We have a couple of people that we're working with now, but one of the things that happens for a lot of people on our island who need housing is that they're very busy working.
Yes.
And often they have 2 jobs. And maybe they have families or more. And so their ability to commit to becoming a director on the society is limited.
So the society had a Zoom meeting.
Right.
Talk a bit about that.
We had a Zoom meeting not very long ago, a few weeks ago, because we wanted to bring the information of the project to the community to correct any misunderstandings people had, to give people an update on what we were doing. So this is our 3rd community meeting that we have been involved with since September. So that's quite a few. We had many new people who had never come to any of our meetings before come, and we had 2 people from other islands come. One was involved in another housing society on Galliano. Another person was general interest from Pender. We also had some people who we've seen before at our community meetings come and ask questions.
And you're working with other Islands. You're working with Galiano. Can you talk a bit about that?
I can. It's a fabulous initiative that we're involved with. We have applied for funding through the Sector Transformation Fund. It's a joint application where we will effectively leverage what we're doing on each island. So we've got a 10-unit development planned, and Galiano has a 12-unit. So we are collaborating together, making a 22-unit initiative, so that we will share our, for project management, we use the same housing consultant. We will share the architect. We will share the same construction company. And we hope that there will be economies of scale from that. And we also understand that great funders, the large funders, are interested in seeing this kind of community collaboration. Mm-hmm. So another aspect for that as well was to, we have relationships, informal relationships with other societies on other Gulf Islands. And what we want to do with this is formalize it and have more meetings and more networking and really be able to support each other as we all go through this process, because we're all learning. Mm-hmm. And the trustees and the planners are all learning. This is new for the Islands Trust to have affordable housing being developed on the islands. There have been successful projects on Salt Spring, but the other smaller islands, it's new.
Why was the choice affordable housing, and we can talk about what that is, as compared to, say, co-op housing?
Sure. That's a really good question, and we did explore that. What about co-op housing? What about co-housing? Mm-hmm. Some of them are incorporated, for instance, under the societies are incorporated under different laws, but that's just a technicality. Really, it's around what does the community need? So, for instance, we thought, well, if it was going to be co-op housing, which is a really wonderful model, and the funders are funding it again, the governments are funding it again, then you need to have a core group of people who are going to be living there. Mm-hmm. You build it for yourself, your owners, and you build it for yourself. And we would certainly be able to help anyone who wants to create a community like that. We think it's a valuable option for mm-hmm. Mayne Island. Co-housing that's also a community where people are building for themselves, mostly. Mm-hmm. And what we found was necessary here was purpose-built rental for people who don't have the capacity to run a housing development, or for people who didn't have the funds to contribute to co-housing, meant that you were owning it, so you had to contribute funds. And the barrier here on Mayne Island and on the Gulf Islands really is that although we have a lot of wealth on our islands, mm-hmm. There's also a very low income for those who are working, very low salaries, and that's an impediment.
It's called
for
the
people.
Working poor.
It is. and you know, a few years ago when there were still houses that might have been affordable if people could cobble together a down payment. They could mm-hmm. afford the mortgage, but that's no longer available to people. And so what's necessary here is the community to develop purpose-built rental housing. And the reason why it can be done as a nonprofit, as opposed to why doesn't somebody else just do it and rent them? Why doesn't a private individual build housing and rent it? And when you look at that, you've got so many positives when you're a nonprofit. First of all, a huge piece is that the land needs to be free. In order to make the models work, the land has to be free. So that's a cost that comes off immediately. Affordable housing is built simple but sturdy, to last at least 60 years, but not fancy. So that's a cost that comes off. So if you're looking at a bar graph where you've got the for-profit, you've got a smaller construction cost. You don't have to pay as much cost for the people to develop it because you're running it with volunteers. There's no land cost and there's no profit. And so that makes it available.
Makes it affordable.
It makes it affordable. You can have affordable rents then.
So the big deal must have been getting the land donated. obviously
huge.
Sean, I believe his name's Sean.
Sean McHugh.
Yeah.
The Housing Society looked for a piece of land for almost 2 years. And we looked at, I like to say it's nine properties. We looked at more, but we're seriously considering 9. And one of the 9 ended up being the one that we're working on now. We were desperate for land. We looked at all sorts of opportunities. We looked at leasing. We looked at purchasing. We put in an offer to purchase on a piece of property because the need was so great here. We thought we would somehow make it work. But in fact, what you need to have is free land. And so we were approached by Sean McHugh and asked if we still needed land. And that was almost a year ago, a little more than a year ago. And once we had the land, we were then able to, we then did some of the feasibility that we needed to do, the due diligence. Can we build here? Is it possible? What are the impediments? You have to do all that kind of feasibility. Is there water? All those questions. And we put in an application to the Islands Trust about a year ago. Yeah.
I saw a little article that was done. There was several articles about the housing and his story. And I phoned him up because I know him from the store. And it was like, to me, it was an incredible thing that someone would give that rather than keep it, for themselves. That's a really huge gift.
It is a huge gift, and it's very altruistic for him to do that. And what his plans are for the rest of his property, it's a 10-acre piece of land that is, the plan is to subdivide it into 3, with 1/3, 3 acres coming to the Housing Society. And the rest of his land, it's in his will that they will be disposed of, and he wants to create a scholarship for art students at a college in Ontario. So there's no gain for him out of this.
And the architect, Richard Ardell, talk about the units. The building.
The buildings. So the buildings
So there's 10 units.
There are 10 units in 5 duplexes, and they are all level entry. The building sizes and room sizes and sometimes the materials are all prescribed by BC Housing, which is a major funder for these projects in BC. We are planning to have 2 accessible units, and we'd like to explore with our next architect when we're about to enter into unit design, and explore having wheelchair accessible as well, because that is a need on our island. Now, what else would you like to know about the units?
Well,
let me tell you some more.
There's more than just the units, though. There's going to be a community room, play area. Okay.
Yes, I'll tell you some more.
Talk about
so
it.
we're planning right now, and it is early days, but we're planning, and the plans are for 5 1-bedroom, 4 2-bedroom, and 1 3-bedroom unit. The reason why we're building 10 units when we know that there's more need on our island for more affordable housing units is because our official community plan already allows for 10 units of increased density. So we are working within the official community plan to create this project. Our 2-bedroom units are 2-story. The 1-bedroom units are 1-story. And the 3-bedroom unit is a 2-story also, with the 3rd bedroom on the
main
floor. And you're right, Patrice, there is a community building. And in the community building will be a kitchenette, a place for people to meet and have gatherings if they want. There will be a play area outside for the kids, and a gathering area outside. As well, in that community building will be laundry facilities as well as lockers. And our units will also have laundry hookups inside the units, for people who want to bring in their own appliances if they would like. Yeah.
And so, back to sort of the affordable housing. I think it's talk about the 70% and 30%.
Okay. The BC Housing has a 10-year program right now. We're in the 3rd year of their 10-year program. And the model that they have is called mixed rental model, where 20% of the units are for deep subsidy, folks, people on fixed incomes, people on income assistance, disability, could be pension with guaranteed income supplement, that sort of income level.
Okay.
But only 20%, and it's really easy. We have 10 units, there's only 2. And the rest, there is also 50%, which is rent geared to income. And what that really means is that the people who come into those units pay 30% of their income on rent.
Okay.
So that is considered affordability if people are spending no more than 30% of their income on rent. So the rents for those units fluctuate. All those units, they fluctuate depending on the people who are in it and the incomes that they have. And there is a maximum income limit available to people who for eligibility into those rent geared to income units, and they range from, I think it's 45,000 to 75,000, depending on the number of people in the family and the size of the units. And then there's also a 30% affordable market, is what we call it, affordable market. Those rates are set in collaboration with BC Housing, and they're based on tables provided by CMHC. For us, it's based reflective of the scales for Victoria, and those rents are set. Those rents for affordable market will be set, and they can increase according to the Consumer Price Index. And the rents for the rent geared to income change when people's income changes.
So if it goes
they earn
down,
less, then it will go down. If they earn more, then it goes up. And every year it can be evaluated yearly. And people make application for these units through the BC Housing Registry, and their incomes are assessed, and their assets and the income from assets are included, and they're assessed for whether or not they qualify. And then when there is a vacancy in one of these, when there's a vacancy, a unit is vacant, then people are placed in an appropriate unit. So it's based on the family composition.
Okay, so I'll clarify this again. So what is the percentage of the housing that's going to go to, like, the people who are working on the island?
All of it is possible to go to people. I would think that people who are earning more than income assistance, which some people may not be, even if they're earning, anybody is eligible for this. It depends on your income.
Okay. Give me an example. Okay, I don't know if this is set in stone, but I was told some prices on the units.
Sure. Let's pretend.
Okay.
This is how it works. Let's pretend.
Okay.
Someone has a yearly income of, I'm trying to get to the value, of $36,000.
Okay.
Okay. That's their yearly income. So you divide that by 12 and you get a monthly income of $3,000. And then the rental portion of that would be 30% of that, which is, what is that?
What is that?
$900. Is that $900?
So
you multiply it by 0.3.
And does it depend on whether it's 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, or 3 bedroom? Or how?
That's a very good question. So it's not about the unit. It's about when you're into the rent geared to income level, or even the deep subsidy level, it's about the household composition. It's about the household income. So if you have 2 people who are earning money in a household, their earnings become the household income, and that becomes what they pay for rent. Now, if there are 2 people, then they're really only allowed to be in a 1-bedroom. But if there's a couple and a child, same income, then they need to be in a 2-bedroom. That's how you put the household composition into the appropriate unit. And there are regulations around how many people can be in a bedroom, and the ages of the children and all of that. And so we match it for that. Is that answering your question at all? It really varies, and I know people want to know, well, how much are they going to be?
Yes.
And this is early days, but because 70% of the development is based on people's income. It depends on their income.
Okay.
Okay, and people, there's a housing income limit that under which their income must be. So I think I mentioned it's about $45,000 for a 1 or 2 bedroom. It's $45,000. It goes up to $75,000 for that rent geared to income.
Okay, one of the comments I've heard is that this is government housing. And when I think of government housing, I think of a housing project in Chinatown that wasn't very pretty.
Right.
It looked like a prison, actually.
Right.
So talk about that. Who's going to be running this?
Okay, I will talk about that. And when we talked earlier about the housing that I was familiar with in Vancouver, when I was working with clients in Vancouver, it was often that kind of idea. Not very pleasant to live there. Government housing. So who runs this? The Housing Society is the owner and operator of the housing. The difference is that although I've mentioned that the design will be simple but sturdy, there's an ability to have flexibility in the design. There are certain requirements that you must have because BC Housing is funding it, but we are making the design decisions. The other thing that makes it very different is that we're running it too. So BC Housing will fund a certain portion of the development. They don't fund the whole thing. The Housing Society must come up with certain equity to come into it, which we have already, for instance, with the land, and we've already had some community contributions, and have applied for and received some funding, grant funding and things like that, and that will increase as we go along. BC Housing funds approximately a third of this project. BC Housing, as well as CMHC, might be another co-funder. So they're only funding a portion of it, and the rest of it will be carried as a mortgage by the Housing Society. So we are the owner and operators of it.
And that could change, that could be in motion depending on who stays on the board and that kind of, or is the membership of the society bigger than just the board? Like it has outside members as
we
well?
have members, community members.
Okay.
One of the things that I think it would be important to talk about here now is as we go through this process, both with the Islands Trust and with BC Housing or another funder, is that there are agreements that we must enter into as the Housing Society to develop these projects. So through the rezoning process, the Housing Society will enter into a housing agreement with the local trust. And that is to guarantee that the housing on that land will be affordable forever. So it stays affordable, whether the Housing Society owns it or another Housing Society owns it. It must remain affordable. That will be the zoning.
Key issue.
That's the zoning that it's going to be under, and we enter into an agreement with the local trust about that. And there are clauses in there speaking to some of the issues that we talked about the rent and how the rent is calculated and all of that. That will be in there. There's also an agreement with BC Housing, if they're a major funder, which they likely will be. It's a 60-year operating agreement. But to be very, very clear, the Housing Society is responsible for and has the right to select people who are qualified renters to put as tenants, to come into the unit as tenants. Nobody else selects those tenants. The Housing Society does. And one of the criteria is that people must be Mayne Island residents. And that is written into the housing agreement with the local trust. So we are making sure that this is housing for Mayne Island, for Mayne Islanders who need housing. And that's very consistent with BC Housing philosophy as well, because we are developing community housing.
So talk a bit about the rezoning, because you mentioned it earlier, you had to get all kinds of tests done, check for the water. Did you have independent people come to do those tests or studies?
Everything has been done. We actually had Rob Underhill from the Conservancy come and do a site visit with us as part of our feasibility assessment before we entered into any more formal processes to talk about the site. And from there, everybody else has been off island. They've been engineers or ecologists, biologists, hydrogeologists. They've all been off island, contracted. We have had
how many?
9 or 10, I think.
Okay.
2 surveys, 4 ecological assessments. We had the well drilled, and the wastewater, we had a septic feasibility study done and a report, and the hydrogeologist has provided 2 reports for us.
You have to be very committed.
You do.
To provide the housing.
That's right. It's not a simple process.
So we talked a bit about your background, and this is sort of I guess you're obviously committed. What do you think the 3 key elements for a healthy and a good community and people are?
3 key elements. Well, at this point in my career, I'm very interested in community sustainability, and I'm active on the Southern Gulf Islands Community Economic Sustainability Commission as well, to enhance the ability of these communities to be sustainable and have their needs met. Can I put it down to 3 key elements? Housing is really key.
It's a big one. I know I went to a harm reduction conference, and there were people from around the world. But one of the people I spoke to was from Switzerland, and they were actually moving forward in terms of changing their communities by providing housing, better income, and whatever rehabilitation or other supports people needed. And in the short term, it was going to cost them a lot, but in the long term, it was going to save a lot of people, a whole community.
Absolutely. And when we're dealing with social need and meeting social need, the outcomes are not immediate. There are some small outcomes, there are outcomes that are personal, but for the whole society at large, it's a long-term strategic planning, and you'll see benefits over the long term. So if a family is securely housed, then the parents are more able to give time and attention to their children. And what we find then is that the children have better health outcomes and better outcomes in school, better educational outcomes. An individual who is securely housed, who isn't going from vacation rentals to non-vacation rentals and back and forth throughout the year, then they may be able to give a bit more time to some of the community organizations that they feel might benefit them as they move along, knowing that they have their needs met, their housing needs met, and their income needs met. Those are really critical. What we know about seniors, it's often senior women, because we live longer than our partners often, is that they may have housing, a house, they may own a house, but as they get older, they're not able to maintain their housing. And they also need some of the equity from their house
To keep going.
To keep going. They've lost part of their income when their spouse dies, and they have increased needs. They need to pay for services, perhaps, as they get older. And so we know lots of research that women, elders, senior people, when people are in community, in secure housing that they can afford, and they're with other people, they also have a better sense of well-being. And it creates a good community balance. It creates a good community.
A mix,
A good mix. And for people who need to get the equity out of their homes or need to change their lifestyle, to have to move from this community where maybe they've been for years, decades, and they have provided services to the community through volunteering. We know that most of the seniors, most of the services on our island are provided by volunteers. So to be able to provide some housing for folks who are very connected to this community, to be able to age in place, is really valuable. There is now an initiative happening on our community, just started, where people are linking seniors with children. And that has been known to be a very positive relationship for both parties, and that's just recently happened in our little community, and it would be very good if we could keep those relationships going.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for doing this.
Thank you, Patrice, for inviting me to do this. My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us. And thank you, Mayne, for giving us this space. This has been great.